Well, good afternoon, everybody. We are starting to wind the conference down, and I'm excited to be sharing with you for the next hour. I'm going to be taking you into a different place, tackling a different topic, but in setting the stage, I want you to understand that this is a human story. Oftentimes, we'll look at topics like this, and we'll be driven by a sense of unknown or even fear. Rather, I want you to recognize that there is a human element to this, that there is a humanity that's at stake, that there is the search of meaning, that there is a search for purpose, that there is a search for hope and for healing, and that the world is seeking after that. And we have the answers in Jesus Christ. And so as I go through this afternoon's presentation, I want that to be foremost in your mind, recognizing that what you're seeing, what is being explained to you, and this is a very visual presentation because of the subject matter. It has to be. There's no other way for you to grasp this. That at the heartbeat of this is still that yearning, that human connection, that human message. So, what are we? What are we? We are ambassadors for Christ. Who here has spent time rubbing shoulders in the diplomatic community? Anybody? Yeah, a little bit. Excellent. Okay. Any other hands? Only one hand went up. Anybody here have spent time talking to diplomats, ambassadors, various members of the international community? No? Okay. Well, this is a treat. We're going to be discovering what an ambassador does and what an ambassador is. And that's going to help us set the stage as we engage in this presentation. So 2 Corinthians tells us, and this is Paul speaking, "Now then we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God did beseech or implore you by us. We pray you in Christ's stead, on his behalf, be reconciled to God. For he hath made him to be sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him." Notice, Paul isn't saying that you might become an ambassador. He's not using metaphorical or language or analogy. He is saying you are. Every person in this room that claims to be a follower of Jesus Christ, you are an ambassador. But what does an ambassador do? We understand the language that Paul uses when he does use metaphor, when he talks about running the race, or you're a farm laborer, or a soldier for Christ. I've never been on the battlefield. I have friends who have fought in the battle spaces. I don't know what that's like, but I understand the metaphor. But this is not, as I said, this is not a metaphor. You are an ambassador. So the very first thing as an ambassador, and this is something I learned from spending some time listening to some people from the diplomatic community, specifically spending an evening with the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, as he was breaking down in our small group what it looked like to do his task, to be an ambassador. And this is how he explained it, and I pulled it together in our Christianese kind of language. So here you go. First of all, you are the official and you are the legal representative of Jesus Christ. Let that sink in. Everyone in this room that claims Christ is king, you are the official and legal representative. You're acting in that capacity. To be an ambassador is a very high calling. In fact, it's something that you don't choose to do. Your government calls you to be placed in that position. You, each of you, have been called by Christ to stand as the legal and official representative of his. And you're placed in a foreign land. Even if this is your hometown, Saskatoon, this is still your foreign land. It is a foreign culture. An ambassador needs to know his king's power and position. You represent his interests, not your own interests. You subvert your interests or subsume your interests to his interests. An ambassador takes the time to understand the culture that you're placed in. And this is something the U.S. ambassador was very, very clear about. I've got to study Arabic culture. I have to understand its history. I need to grasp its belief system, its social system. I can't be ignorant of this. If I'm going to be effective, I need to know it. And so we are to understand the culture. We're set apart from it, and this is something the U.S. ambassador made very clear. We're set apart from it, but we're in it. We are in the world, but we're not of the world. Do you see the distinction? And so what is the job of being an ambassador? Well, there's a few different jobs, but two primary applications. One, to effectively communicate the king's message. That's your goal. That's your task. To proclaim God, to proclaim Christ. And then, as we see, and this is another side to the diplomatic community that isn't talked about much, but it's definitely a part of it. When you see challenges to your king's position and power, when you see challenges to your king's interests, you warn the rest of the diplomatic community. Pay attention. Wake up. Look, here comes the challenge. Here comes the issues. Here are the trends. Prepare yourself. Prepare your mind. Prepare your people. That's all part of being an ambassador. And that is your calling. Every single one of you in this room, you are the legal representatives of Jesus Christ, the official representatives. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. With that in mind, what are you afraid of, really, when you understand that position? So a fantastic example of what it means to be an ambassador is found in Acts 17. This is Paul when he goes to Athens, specifically being taken to Mars Hill. And so Acts 17, verses 16 to 32 is a remarkable example. And in fact, I believe that as we are now in a Romans 1 world where we are looking for wonder and for meaning and purpose in the creation rather than the creator, that we now have a unique opportunity to use this very model that Paul uses in Acts 17, because he is going to a pagan culture. Now, while Paul waited for them at Athens, his spirit was stirred in him when he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. Therefore he disputed in the synagogue with the Jews and with the devout persons, and in the market daily with them that met with him. Then certain philosophers of the Epicureans and the Stoics encountered him, and some said, "What will this babbler say?" Others, he seems to be a setting forth or proclaiming of some strange or some foreign gods, because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what of this new doctrine whereof thou speakest? For thou bring certain strange things to our ears. We would know, therefore, what these things mean. For all the Athenians and the strangers or the foreigners, which were there, spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing." Kind of sounds like small-town prairies, right? Coffee shop, what else do? You go hear some strange new thing, right? If you don't hear a rumor by 10, you start one. That's how it works. Yeah, some of you know what I'm talking about. Then Paul stood in the midst of the Mars Hill and said, "You men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very superstitious or very religious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.' Whom therefore you ignorantly worship, him I will declare to you. God," now look how Paul brings us in. "God who made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth." God is separate. He's set apart. He's not the same as your pagan deities. "Dwells not in temples made with hands, neither is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing that he gives to all life and breath and all things. And he hath made of one blood all nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before the appointed and the bounds of their inhabitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply or perhaps they might feel or grope after him, and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live, and move, and have our being. Also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring." Notice what Paul is doing there. We'll go into this in a little more detail in a moment. "For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold, or silver, or stone, graven by art or man's devices, and the times of this ignorance God winked at or overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he hath appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man, being Jesus Christ, whom he has ordained, whereof he has given assurance unto all men, in that he has raised him from the dead. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, and others said, we will hear you again of this matter. So here's the breakdown. Paul is in Athens, and he recognizes their spiritual situation. He has done a survey. He's walked around. He has talked to the people. He engages with the Jewish and the Gentile believers who are there. There is a synagogue, and he has spent some time at the synagogue. He encounters the philosophers of the day, and he is taken to the council. He is taken to the council of the Areopagus. Now, what you don't get in the text is the backdrop that Paul finds himself in. Being taken to the Areopagus is a big deal. He is literally being put before a panel of judges. This is a long-held, historically important panel, a long-held, historically important group of judges who will now determine whether what Paul is saying has any validity, and if not, he will be expelled from the city. That was their task, to be at safeguards of sorts in terms of what is going to be taught in the city. And so the backdrop is really interesting because he's taken to Mars Hill. And the Areopagus is a shoulder of Mars Hill. But what's on Mars Hill? A massive temple to Nike, a temple to Zeus, a temple to Athena. Massive pagan edifices. There is Paul, standing before the judges of the city, the backdrop of these enormous temples. He is in the heart of Greco-Roman paganism. And he has to give an account. You don't think Paul was intimidated? Probably was, just a little bit. I would be. We all would probably be a little bit intimidated. You're brought before the judge of the city. And this is a pagan group of judges. So what does Paul do? Well, he acknowledges their setting. He knows it. He's already studied it a bit. He uses their own spiritual culture to launch into the gospel. Specifically, a monument that he has seen to the unknown or the unknowable God. And then that becomes the leverage he uses to launch into who the true God is. So he presents the character of this true God, that he is creator, Lord of heaven and earth. He is not the same as Nike or Zeus or Athena or any of your other pagan deities. He's miles above this. He is the one who's outside of time, space, and matter. And that this God is the one who gives us life and breath. And he preaches to them judgment, repentance, and Jesus Christ as the resurrection. And he even quotes their own philosophers. Paul's a learned man. He didn't go into this ignorantly. He knows their own teachings. And he uses that as well to bring forward this question of who is this true God? Who is this unknown God? And what's the response that they gave to Paul? Same response they're going to give you. Same response. Some will mock you. Others will say, hey, I'd like to hear more. And maybe somebody might actually believe after they've gone through and had the Holy Spirit work in their life. Because it's the Holy Spirit who changes the heart. Paul is just the ambassador, just like you. So with all that in mind as the backdrop, let's take a look at where our culture is today, just briefly before we jump into transformational culture, this very interesting human story that takes place in community. So my friend Roger Neal writes this in his book, Revolution in Mind. In the 1960s, a revolution had indeed taken place, a revolution in mind and praxis that changed the course of modern history. A cultural and political earthquake took place in the West. I am of that generation that got shaken. The true aftermath of that earthquake wasn't experienced at the time. We are experiencing it now. So true. In fact, what I will be sharing with you today has a direct linkage to that 1960s revolution. And I'm really doing you all a disservice because this is really a 2.5-hour long series of lectures that I give when I'm at Miller College, but you get a little snapshot. So here we go. What happened from the 60s to now? We had a revolution in mind and action, or praxis. So in the 60s and then into the early 70s, we saw the acceptance of expanding our spiritual horizons through the use of psychedelics. And now today we are in a psychedelic renaissance. Eastern ideas, the gurus of the East came west and sold us their culture, their religion, their philosophy, their practices, and we bought it up. We absolutely absorbed it into our culture. Woodstock comes along. That's just one example of many. It was an Aquarian exposition. It was a social ecstatic experience. And there was many others, the human being, the acid trips. This is the revolution of the 60s being shaped on specifically the West Coast, but also a little bit on the East Coast as well. And actually right across the U.S. It was, of course, a time of the Vietnam War, world peace, anti-war movements, social unrest, no longer trusting the culture, no longer trusting the government, the rejection of biblical norms, authority, and truth claims, free love and sexual exploration. That became part of the milieu. Communal living, postmodernism is entering the picture, relativism enters the picture, and we have a burgeoning digital technology, a burgeoning computer industry with its own countercultural links. And all of this comes together. By the 1980s and 90s, all of this was coming out of the fringes, and it was entering into the mainstream. Human potential and human psychology. Express thyself, accept thyself, esteem thyself, the trinity of the human self-esteem movement. A really interesting eclectic spiritual movement begins. It's a combination of Eastern beliefs, Western occultism, human potential, and all this coalesces within what we call the New Age movement. And this becomes a kind of a thinly spread spiritual smorgasbord that we could sample from as we're now searching for some kind of spiritual experience, some type of way of self-actualizing. At the same time, paganism, Wicca, witchcraft, enters the scene in a more larger way. And so we have pagan festivals that are born and grow. Pagan spirit gathering, which happens in the U.S. Midwest, Starwood, and a pile of others. The 1993 Parliament of the World Religions brings witchcraft to the stage and gives them legitimacy. And now they are considered to be a new religious movement. Green politics begins to take shape, especially in the 1990s. We now have a new purpose. We're serving the earth. We serve creation. And so later on, as all of this is starting to just kind of flavor itself throughout culture, we see new musical expressions that are being created. Digital technology is being married to ecstatic experiences, primarily in Goa, India, and then from there, Israel, and then from Israel it jumps to Europe, and then it makes its way back to the U.S., where it gets mixed with ecstasy, and has slowly begins to emerge out of the underground scene from the shadows. And that brings us to where we are today, transformational culture, a cultural movement, a communal movement where we now feel that experience together. We now have this sense of the wonder of the natural world and of our human oneness with the divine. And I'm going to have to give you a little bit of a background in terms of just some of the thinking that kind of shapes this, and I'll take you to a couple of events to give you an idea. And I want you to realize that while this may seem theoretical, this isn't your world. It's the world that's just outside of this door. It's already shaped your world in many ways, in many respects. And if all of you are using Google, it's shaped your world in ways you haven't even imagined. So what is involved in transformational culture, also known as evolutionary festivals? Well, a whole series of pieces come together to shape a story. First of all, and really important, is a sense of communitas. Communitas is just a fancy way of saying that we're having an organic experience in community. We're all sharing this sense of a sacred experience together. It's a group encounter. We're all excited together. These events have sacred spaces, temples, shrines. It's a spiritual experience. There may be yoga or energy healing or Reiki, plant medicines, psychedelics, lots of workshops and group discussions and panels. It's amazing who you'll encounter. Music, usually EDM, electronic dance music, but I've heard it all, literally all, from bluegrass to Wow, when I was at Burning Man in 2019, I was there 4 days before the event actually opened. Some camp that was building a great big, doing a great big art piece or whatever, they played Christmas music 24 hours a day, day in, day out. I'm like, no, you can only take it so long. But music becomes the driver. It becomes that sense of, we're all coming to dance, we're coming to party, but that's just the icing on the cake. The rest of it gets much, much deeper. You experience visionary and interactive art, which compels introspection and illumination. There's a sense of harmony with nature, radical tolerance, it's non-judgmental, and all this, it becomes a journey or a quest as you anticipate transformation. You are shedding your limitations. You're transgressing the norms. And as you transgress, you transform. And of course, that is the Genesis 3 story. And it's our lived utopia, how we want to live, how reality should be. So where do these take place? There are hundreds of these events. I was at the Texas Eclipse Festival just 2 weeks ago, and one of the main organizers was saying, hey, we got roughly 800 of these transformational style events in the U.S. alone, with roughly 32 million Americans participating annually. I thought to myself, well, that kind of puts the Mormons to shame. We always, in terms of counter-cult ministries, we're thinking Mormons, JWs. 32 million Americans participating in some element of this. Small, small ways or big, big ways. That's a lot of people. A lot. So from 2013 to 2016, I was pinning on Google Maps, which is super ironic, you'll get that in a minute, the various locations of where these events take place. The ones that I could find. By the time halfway through 2016, I'm like, Carl, you got to stop. I had another 50, 80 events to vet, another 50 or 80 events to stick on the map. Do you see Saskatchewan there? Yes, you have a few. In fact, just outside of Saskatchewan from 2013 to 2016, or probably just outside of Saskatoon, maybe it still exists, I don't know, was the Toon Pagan Summerfest. Why not? That's our world. It's Romans 1. Probably one of the oldest running ones was called the Connect Festival between Swift Current and Medicine Hat. Now it's called the Emotion Festival. So what does this look like? How do we begin to frame this in our own thinking? G.K. Lung, a leader within this movement, puts it this way. No less profound is this emergence of a new type of spiritual culture in these festivals, a spiritual culture completely uninterested in charismatic leaders, dogmas, or doctrines, where ritual does not require that we surrender our autonomy as critical thinking individuals, but instead arises as the shared acknowledgement and honoring of our sacred experience together. He continued to say, it's not just the idea of the world we want to live in, it's the actual experience. And it is that for a short time. And it is ecstatic. It is a very different type of world. And so there's yours truly. I'm doing social surveys. I take, as I said earlier, my other presentation, I take my research seriously. And I am engaging in social surveys. I have a clipboard, I've got pens, and I'm stopping people, and I have people doing my surveys. It's interesting because I have a list of what your past and your present religions may be. And there's about 20 different religions you can choose from, and then a spot for other. And people will typically be going past Christian, past Christian, past Christian, past Christian, past Christian. Now, Buddhist, Wiccan, pagan, the list goes on. Other. To the question, no, it's actually not a question, it's a statement. God is separate from nature and me. People will be disagreeing with that across the board. I have a question or a statement on there. Earth is a living organism. And it's interesting, all of those who are claiming atheists on my clipboard are also saying yes to that. And I'm like, oh, that's really, really interesting. This is remarkable. You're an atheist who does not believe in the Judeo-Christian God. That's obvious. But by saying yes to Earth being a living being, you have just demonstrated that you still have a mythological worldview. You're not as atheistic as you think you are. You're not that materialist. Rather, you're already, as an atheist, connecting into something spiritual, something mythological. So it's really interesting as you start to pour through the data, what you're going to see. In 2017, and this is, by the way, at Ponoka, Alberta, it's a regional Burning Man event. Everybody thinks of Ponoka, of course, being, stampedes and oil derricks and cowboys. And just 20 minutes out of the city or out of the town, there's 1,000 people gathering to engage in a transformational weekend. So in 2017, when I was doing the surveys, I was asking, why are you attending? Friends and connection. These are literally the responses. To give and receive joy, fun and meet people, try and forget about the world. That's telling. To love myself, open my mind, make a sacrifice to the art gods. The lady who was camping right beside us, who was about my age, was saying to be with my daughter. When she put down on the sheet what her religious identification was, she wrote down in the other column, broken-hearted. Again, this is a human story. This is a search for meaning and hope, for healing. So last year when I was back at Freezerburn, I asked the question on my sheets, how is this transformational? Safe space to self-express, to be me without fear. It's experiences beyond my normal routine. It's a place for genuine conversations. And by the way, it is. I have had incredible conversations in these locations. It's where I can tackle my social anxiety. Seeing people with their guard down restores my trust in humanity. Growth by stepping outside one's comfort zone. It feels like home, a more truly human experience. And over again, I hear these words that this is our church. This is our church. So some of you last October would have seen Hamas going to a music festival, shooting the place up. And some of you may have had some questions about that event because in a few of the clips, you see a big statue of Buddha. And the media portrayed it as a music festival. Wrong. It's not a music festival. It was a transformational festival. The Nova Festival is part of a global transformational movement. It's not just music. Definitely music's a part of it. But there was much more going on. In fact, this was the Israeli edition of a festival series that began out of Brazil. And so when you were seeing that happening, this was that kind of an event. But the media didn't understand how to frame it. To them, it's just a music festival. I have the eyes to see. I've been in the culture, walking in that culture long enough to go, oh, I know these people. I actually know these people. I know where they're coming from. I know what they're doing there. I get it. And then 2 weeks ago, if you could have come with me, if we would backtrack 2 weeks from now, I'd take you all with me to Texas. And you could have been a part of the Texas Eclipse Festival. Between 35,000 and 50,000. At this point, it's still hard to know what the numbers exactly are because apparently they oversold. And it was quite the weekend. It was a global collaboration of 12 tribes, 12 transformational tribes, huge event organizations coming together to come and venerate the sun. And this is a subculture within transformational festivals, a sub-movement where they chase the eclipse, wherever it may be. And they come together in ceremony to venerate the sun. And I'm not kidding. That is what it is. It is coming to venerate the sun. It is coming to now have that cosmic connection between the earth, you, the moon, and the sun in this perfect cosmic alignment. As Graham St. John, he's a secularist, but one of the very few who's actually taken the time as an anthropologist to really dive into this culture. He puts the Eclipse Festival movement this way. It's where cosmic nature spirituality is cultivated. And if you would have come with me, this is the kind of stuff you would have seen. This is me taking pictures at the consciousness stage. And then we learned all kinds of stuff. We had Neuralink, Elon Musk's group, We had the co-founder of Neuralink there. We had Elon Musk's top neurosurgeon who does the brain-computer implants, the interfacing, a very technical breakdown of brain-computer interfacing. It's technology as much as it is spirituality. The language that's being used is this is an ancient future worldview. It is ancient in that we draw from that pagan past. It is future in that we infuse it with technology. And the two end up forming itself into a cultural shaper, into a new machine. A lot of discussions on psychedelic futures, on where the psychedelic renaissance is taking us, including people. We had one individual who was a NASA insider who was very involved in doing NASA simulations and working through very complex processes in NASA, explaining how he gets his downloads, his entity downloads through his psychedelics, and then can take that and put that onto the drawing board, so to speak. And he was telling us that in a few weeks he's meeting with Elon to work through some of the ideas that he has now received. Lots of talk on blockchain, lots of talk on space, lots of talk on technology. And I could show you some pretty cool stuff, including an amazing drone show that took place. And in all this, there is this sense of nature-based spirituality. It's a big community. But let me take you to the mothership, to the one that shaped your world in ways that you didn't even realize. I'll take you to Burning Man, to the desert of northern Nevada. Burning Man, this is the city. It's called Black Rock City, and it forms itself once a year out of nothing. It exists for a handful of weeks, 10 days primarily, and then it disappears. And I do mean it disappears. If you would go to that desert right now, you would see nothing, a flat, empty expanse. And here we have the city of 80,000 people. As it's been figuratively said, Burning Man is a self-service cult. Wash your own brains. So that's what it looks like. Thousands and thousands of people coming together, building this city, all done by volunteers. Yes, there is a staff, but the city isn't constructed by the staff. They just lay out the infrastructure. It's done by those in attendance. To give you just a bit of background, it started off in 1986 in San Francisco on Baker Beach, when Larry Harvey and a handful of friends banged together a 9-foot human effigy, had some beers, threw some gas on it, lit her up on the beach. Yay! And there was nothing. It was just a bunch of friends doing something stupid. And they said, wow, that feels kind of cool. And they did it again and again, and there's a whole backstory to it that I can't get into, but by 1990, there's roughly 500 people on the beach, and then the cops show up because you don't have a permit. And that's what's really important in the bureaucratic age, right? And so they say, you can't burn this crazy thing on the beach, go somewhere else. So they went off to the Black Rock Desert of northern Nevada, where there is nothing. And they burned her out there. And it's actually on federal land. They had to get a permit. In 1997, the attendance was 10,000. By the year 2000, the temple was introduced. 2010, the attendance exceeded 50,000 people. 2019, it was closer to 80,000. During COVID, they did a remarkable job in putting together virtual burns. And then last year, you may have seen it on the news. Did anybody here see it on the news? Raise your hands. Yeah, quite a few of you. It rained. It rained a lot. Yeah. And I was in the thick of that one. Some crazy stuff. So there's approximately 100, or a little bit more than 100 regional burns around the world, and thousands of spin-off events. Regional burns happen in this country, in Canada, in Alberta. Saskatoon has a substantial burner community. When I'm at Freezer Burn, I'm meeting all the guys from Saskatoon. When I'm at Burning Man in Nevada, I rub shoulders with them there too. Yes, your province is in the middle of this all. In Israel, they do an event called Mid-Burn, where they burn an effigy of Adam and Eve. This has become literally the cutting edge of culture. This is where Google goes. This is Silicon Valley's event. This is really a San Francisco event. So, the Google Doodle. When you log in to Google on Christmas Day, you might see Santa Claus or a Christmas tree, right? That's on the homepage. That's called the Google Doodle. The very first one was 1998, during Burn Week. Larry Page and the team said to all of Silicon Valley, the same week that they had their lawyers drafting their corporate papers, and apparently they lost, I can't remember how many millions of dollars by saying, we're leaving you guys alone to figure it all out. We're going to Burning Man. So they hung up their shingle for all of Silicon Valley to see, the first Google Doodle, Burning Man. Because that's how important it was to the Google team. And so when Eric Schmidt became the CEO that made Google what it is today, the very products all of you are using, you didn't think this touched your life, did it? You're all burners digitally. Really you are. When Eric Schmidt became the CEO of Google, the reason he got the job is one of the reasons. His resume floated to the top was he had Burning Man on his resume. And so Larry Page and the Google team took him to Burning Man to see how he would do. And if he could grasp what was happening at Burning Man, he could get Google, because what looks like chaos is actually a great big network, an organic network. And that's how Google sees information. And of course, there's politics. In 2019, we had 54 U.S. mayors touring the city to see what they could take away and bring back to their cities. We have congressmen. We have people from the World Bank. I rubbed shoulders once accidentally for 2 hours, had a great conversation with the European Union liaison officer to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. That's how it is. You're riding your bicycles, 3 o'clock in the morning. Somebody's serving grilled cheese sandwiches. Oh, it turns out it's Elon Musk's group. It's his camp. When Elon Musk introduced his Tesla Roadster, he didn't do it in Milan or in Toronto or in New York. He introduced it first at Burning Man. So if you don't think that this impacts your life, you're all of a sudden, now I think, maybe seeing things a little bit differently. So Larry Harvey in 2017, and that year the theme was Radical Ritual, puts it this way. The moral of our theme, Radical Ritual, in fact, was that it doesn't really matter what you believe, it's what you experience. The whole point this year was to convince people that Burning Man is a spiritual movement. It's not a religion, but it's a spiritual movement, and you know it when you see it. So I'm going to play you a couple of quick videos because that's the only way you're going to grasp the visual of this.
It's been called a social experiment, post-apocalyptic training. Some call it home. A temporary city emerges in the desert once each year. No status, no government, no currency. A society focused on the individual. 1 week celebrating humanity, expression, and collaboration. A pilgrimage to disconnect, to look inward, and to explore the self. No inhibitions, no judgment, no rules. By the end, art and buildings will be burnt to ashes. No trace of them will be left until next year, where it will be rebuilt again.
What was it?
One by one they arrive into dust storms and scorching heat. The city's been constructed and dismantled over 30 times, entirely by its attendees. A community eager to reconnect, to explore, to build what their imaginations can conceive. But thousands of strangers come as they are and share what makes them unique. This experiment isn't about discovering a supreme being. It's about discovering what's supreme in ourselves. A recalibration of the spirit. A reminder to step outside our bubbles. Put down our screens. And rediscover ourselves above the noise. To surrender. Let go. And co-create a world together.
Let me play a little video showing what it's like at night, because that's when it comes alive. Now it all looks flashy and full of lights and color, and it is, there's no question. But then the wind picks up. For 5 minutes, for 30 minutes, 2 hours, 12 hours, 18 hours. You hunker down. You try to breathe. Who wants to come with me? There's a hand up in the back. Awesome, Doug. John, perfect. Good. Awesome. Dawn, are you coming too? Yes. Yes. Here we go. So why is it called Burning Man? Because in the very center of the city, we have a massive human effigy. And in 2017, the man was placed in his own temple. As Larry Harvey said, that year's theme was radical ritual. It's not what you do, it's what you experience that allows you to see that it is a spiritual movement. 2018 was iRobot, asking that big question, can man and machine merge? What is our technological future looking like? What's our transhuman future looking like? 2019 was Metamorphosis. Can we evolve? Can we become a new creation? Can we birth ourselves and become more than what we always have been holding ourselves back to being? Can we become something else? And then I missed 2022 because thank you, Mr. Biden, for your restrictions at the border. But in 2023, last year, yes, I was there. Last year's theme was Animalia. And then the man was placed on a large pedestal with a beehive construction all around. You are all part of the hive, which is Silicon Valley speak as well. So at the end of the week, the man is burned, and it is a spectacle as thousands gather around. Music is playing, Lots and lots of fireworks, and I'm just going to give you a little glimpse of the fireworks at high speed. It's just a little taste, and then we'll go to the temple. It's the wildest fireworks you're going to see. And if you notice, there's a lady off to the side. Maybe some of you have seen that, a person. So every 15 or 20 feet or so, we have somebody watching the crowd because we don't want people running into the fire. And that actually happened in 2017. A man immolated himself, ran through all the fire marshals, the fire guards, and got in and burned himself alive. This is what the temple looks like. It has its own temple. It has actually numerous temples. These are large constructions. So this is the temple in 2017, the temple in 2018. The top cone, we found out later, was all being held together with industrial-sized ratchet straps because the weight of the top 15 or so feet, 20 feet, was too heavy for the base. And as they were building it, it was like, uh-oh, we can hear creaking and cracking in places that there shouldn't be. And so all of us were underneath it all week long, not realizing that it's actually being held together with industrial ratchet straps. But it did. It stayed together. And it was huge, 65 feet tall, 250 feet wide, a spiral pattern, Galaxia, the temple of Galaxia, the mother Gaia of the universe. And that was a 2019 temple. Now, something very important to know about the temple, and this brings us around to the humanity of this, the search for healing and the hope that there is, that man is searching for. So the temple starts off as a blank slate. The walls are bare. It's a beautiful building. And then all week long, people are bringing offerings to the temple. Wedding dresses, photo albums, urns of ashes of loved ones. They're writing on the walls. Mementos are being deposited. People are weeping. People are mourning. It's a 24-hour-long funeral, and the funeral lasts 10 days, from the time it's opened to roughly the time it's burned, as people are looking for some type of hope. And so all week long, it just gets piled with more and more and more notes and more gifts, more offerings in the search for healing, the hope for catharsis. I'm holding in my hand right there a suicide note. And the note goes on to explain that if I'm successful, please bring my note to the temple to burn. And so these are the things you're going to see, the notes that are on the walls by the thousands. And it becomes very, very real because these are people who are hurting, who are hoping, who are looking for something, for answers. Mother, you disappoint me every day. Your only child. It became real when they took you away in a body bag out of the house. Hard stuff. They have temple guardians. They're not Christians, but they recognize that this is a place of such intense sorrow that people lose it. And I've watched people literally just lose it right there because it is such a heavy, heavy place. Some pretty hard stuff. It's hard to see, but with this temple I burn my previous judgment, fundamentalism, bigotry, and religious imprisonment. Let's be free, kind, and full of joy. And then, in contrast to the temple, in contrast to the man with its fireworks and the music and this cacophony of sounds, when the temple burns, Oops, sorry. When the temple burns, it's quiet. You'll hear weeping. You might hear some crying as everybody's watching their pain go up in flames. You ask them later, do you find healing? Did you find some sense of closure? No. For a moment. One of the art pieces that we had this last year, 2023, was the Chapel of Babel, literally framed as Babel. And you could go inside, and there was a triumphal arch in the center. There was a confessional where one of the artists was in the confessional booth, so you could go in and confess your sins. And it was quite the structure. At the end of the week, it burned as well, because a lot of the art pieces burn. So what's interesting is while this is going on at the Chapel of Babel, my campmates, my friend Brian, who does blacksmithing as a hobby, has a cross. He makes these blacksmith crosses. And he gave a cross to the girl beside us. They ended up having this conversation that started off, and Brian was tired. They burned the Chapel of Babel at midnight. And Brian was tired. I mean, we've been in the desert now for almost 10 days. And it's a harsh environment. And this chick was like pestering Brian, and Brian's got this incredible sense. He just attracts people to himself. It's kind of weird, but it just happens. Brian just stumbles into crazy conversations, and this lady was like pestering him. I'm on a journey. Where have you all been? Yada, yada, yada. And Brian's like, it's midnight. I'm tired. Leave me alone. I'm here to watch this thing go up in flames. And then finally, I don't know what happened, but Brian ends up in this conversation, and he's compelled. He pulls out one of his crosses, because Burning Man is a gifting community. There's no buying or selling. There's no barter. We're all gifting everything to each other. Food, clothing. I've literally had people give me the shirt off their back, literally. I like that shirt. It's a cool shirt. Off it is. Here's yours. That's the kind of world it is. And so Brian pulls out one of his gifts, a handmade cross that he has fashioned as a blacksmith. And he gives it to her and just simply says, trust Jesus. That's all he says. And she breaks right there. And no words are said. No words could be said. Tears are streaming down her face, and she's looking into Brian's eyes and looking into Brian's eyes and looking into Brian's eyes and looking into Brian's eyes. I'm like, this is getting really, really uncomfortable already. And then she turns to Audrey, Brian's wife, and does the same thing. And then she grabs my arm, and I'm holding her shoulder, and the tears are just streaming. And it's awkward, and we don't know what's going on. And finally, I think it was her boyfriend, prods her, and up they get, and they disappeared. And the three of us are looking at each other going, what in the world happened? We have no clue what her background is. We have no idea of her history. All we know is those two words, trust Jesus, and that little gift, that little itty-bitty seed broke something inside of her. So we go to workshops as well. All kinds of workshops. This is, again, where you'll end up running into people from Silicon Valley, some of the leading lights in terms of the technologies that you use. The one big picture, that is a Christian camp. It's a progressive Christian camp. I can't repeat the name of the camp because it's a bad word. And there they had a workshop entitled Jesus and Psychedelics. As ministers were now giving us their personal justification for why they use psychedelics. LSD, DMT, psilocybin, because now it allows them to feel agape love. One of the workshops I went to in 2018 was from one of the more important figures from the cryptocurrency community. He had just come back from an ayahuasca journey down in Peru and was giving us his new download. And it was about a 2-hour long workshop. We had a whole pile of people there who were programmers and developers, all building the apps that you all use. Again, you're all digital burners. You don't even know it. And he was describing how we have a new series of building blocks for the new civilization. And this isn't his words, but this is a takeaway. The world is being reconstructed with 4 new foundations. 1, a new sense of spirituality, out with the Judeo-Christian idea that God is separate and other. in with the shamanistic, the divine feminine, the psychedelic, the mystical. A new social ethos is being constructed right there in real time at Burning Man. That is what's taking place. It's a giant social experiment. We now need to have new forms of economic governance, and we'll be using that through cryptocurrency, primarily likely CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. That makes way more sense than decentralized currencies. And all this is going to be tied into a new social contract. You're buying and selling, if it doesn't fit blocks 1 and 2, may all of a sudden be canceled. How do we manage this at a global level? Artificial intelligence. I walked away from there with my jaw dragging behind me going, an ancient future worldview is literally emerging right before our eyes. He literally gave us a set of blueprints for how to construct the new world, from the spiritual to the technical, with an entire system of management in between. And so, yes, 2023 was mud, mud, mud. The rains came on Friday and they went on through Sunday. People freaked out. People panicked, especially first-timers. And it didn't help that we had, I think, Chris Rock or some other big-name guy walk out. And then, of course, the news media is all there. And we were hearing all kinds of stories later on about outbreaks of Ebola or some bizarre disease where people were vomiting blood. It's just utter strangeness. Sinkholes were apparently opening up underneath us. National Guard was poised to invade, on and on. I'm like, what? I was in the thick of this. In fact, on Sunday morning, I was on a tow rope with a whole crew of people. We're all strangers to each other, literally by hand, pulling out trucks and campers. Ebola? Oh, it was just bizarre. Anyways, that's how social media works, right? Doesn't have to be true. You just have to repeat it long enough. Bottom picture is our porta potties. Some of them overflowed. Most of them, well, all of them got tramped in with 20, 30 pounds of mud, and you could not move. So why? Why in the world would we go to Burning Man? We have a little team. It's a ragtag group. And we're going for a few different reasons. One, I'm a researcher. That's what I do. So I'm researching, number one, that culture, because the culture itself is important enough to understand, because it's the culture that's shaping your world. And then we're understanding how global trends are being discussed, because this is really a combination of Mardi Gras and the World Economic Forum all mashed together in the desert. It is of that caliber. And then we have a camp of the unknown God. Where do you think that comes from? It's the Acts 17 model. And we have people coming up to us going, who is this unknown God? And we have conversations. We're gifting food. We spend time interacting with all the neighbors around us. I give away copies of my book. Brian gives away copies of his crosses, examples of his crosses. And we're having conversations. Everybody who's been a part of our crew has come with different gifts and different callings. And my friend Jen at the very bottom is an ex-sex worker. Now she's a Christian. She's picking up stuff that I completely miss as a guy, and actually was involved in an intervention because there was a situation that they encountered where somebody was probably going to end up in a really, really bad place, and she could see the writing, and so she was able to intervene. So we're there. Bottom picture, the guy with the bluish shirt. His name is Adam. We were riding bicycles, and it was late at night, and a bunch of my team, they were going to bed by midnight. I'm like, you guys are crazy. This is when things happen. Get out there. Don't stop till 3 or 4 in the morning. Drink more coffee if you need to. Like, just go. And Adam came to me and he says, where do you go? I said, well, come with me. I'll show you around. I know the city inside and out. So Adam came with me. We're riding our bicycles across the desert. And I stop him at one point and go, dude, he's not a Christian. He actually moved in with us. We had different people moving in with us that year. Complete strangers. We had our own little bitty tribe going on. I said, dude, what's wrong with you? You're at Burning Man. You have every sensual experience that you can imagine at your fingertips, and you're hanging out with a bunch of Christians? Like, I mean, really? What's wrong with you? And he's going, I'm learning so much from you guys. Yes, that's what's going on. So, you all don't need to come to Burning Man. You have Burning Saskatoon. you have burning swift current. You have burning moose jaw. Wherever you may be, wherever your feet are, that is where your ministry is. When my feet go to Burning Man, there's my ministry. When your feet walks into Walmart, there's your ministry. Around here, there's your ministry. So there's one of Brian's crosses that we tacked up at the temple, just to see what kind of responses we would have. Listen, we are called to be ambassadors for Christ. What I'm showing you may be a shock for some. Some of you might be kind of blown away by it all. Look, when Christ says to go into all the world, there's no caveats. He didn't say go into all the world except Yorkton. No. Here's the opportunity. So some of us in our team already have our tickets. Pray, we need more tickets. They are very difficult to get, and they're very expensive. We need about 3 to 4 more tickets. We have a team of maybe 4 to 6 coming this time. And we'll be putting up the camp of the unknown God and trying to exemplify being ambassadors for Christ in the heart of re-enchantment. Thank you for your time this afternoon. God bless.